As part of our ongoing scrutiny of the Foreign Office, the Foreign Affairs Committee is very pleased to welcome Yvette Cooper, the new Foreign Secretary, and Sir Ollie Robbins, who we're very grateful to see again, having seen him last week. We have a lot of questions, as you could imagine, Foreign Secretary, and we are going to try and be disciplined, and we want to be able to get all the way through to Sri Lanka, which is the last question. So we're going to try and keep it'll be a little bit quick fire, if that's all right, just so that we can, because it's our first session and we want to be able to just sort of cover as much ground as possible. And obviously, as you as your priorities become more clear and so on, then we may end up focusing perhaps next time more on one particular topic. But we thought we would start with this format, if that's all right with you. Yeah.
Great.
So I thought I would begin by just asking you, what does a progressive foreign policy look like?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. As a former committee chair myself, I have a huge respect for the work that select committees do, and always had a slight feeling that maybe it was calmer when I would sit and answer questions from the committee, but thank you very much. So I think, look, our job, and my job as Foreign Secretary, is to make sure that the partnerships we build abroad make us stronger at home. And that means focusing on our security, on our prosperity, and also on our values. And I think in each of those areas you can see actually progressive elements. So our security is the bedrock on which all other opportunities are built. If we don't have national security, we can't enjoy any of the other opportunities. If we don't have border security, then we lose cohesion in our country. And for our prosperity, that has to mean the prosperity of the whole nation. So it's why, for example, when we're championing trade and investment from across the world, we're championing all the regions. It's why mayors from across the country have been part of our economic diplomacy across the world to get investment into every corner of the country. And I think for our values, it's about respect for the rule of law and also our shared humanity. And that's why, for example, with the Hurricane Melissa hit Jamaica, we were swift to make sure that we could provide a direct humanitarian response because of that sense of the values we have towards other countries in the world as well. So in the end, all of those things we do feed through that security, prosperity, and our values woven together. We are stronger as a country because of the partnerships we build abroad. I think for some less progressive approaches are about saying, do you know what, we just can be isolationist, we don't believe in those partnerships. We do believe in them, and we believe in that international respect for the rule of law and countries working together to support each other in the face of collective threats.
Very good. Chancellor Merz said about Ukraine yesterday, for the first time since the war began, a ceasefire seems possible. So we're getting lots of very positive briefings about Ukraine, but we're not getting any detail as to what it means. And I wondered if you were in a position to be able to help us, and to be able to help us about, if there is a plan emerging, what role will Britain play in that?
So I think part of the reason that you're keen for more details because those discussions are still underway as we speak. And I think it is a very important process set of discussions that are taking place at the moment. No one wants peace more than the Ukrainians after everything they have endured over the last several years. But of course, we also need it to be a just and lasting peace. It cannot simply be an opportunity for Putin to pause and come again. And so therefore it has to respect the strength and sovereignty of Ukraine and also the security of Europe, the security of the UK, but the security of Europe more widely. We know that the threat from Russia is broader than the threat to Ukraine itself. It's also the threat to Europe, and so that's why that is part of it. But look, you'll have seen some of the discussions around that we've had over a long period of time. The reason that Prime Minister set up alongside France, the coalition of the willing was also to talk about the kinds of security guarantees that need to be in place. place. We talked about some of the financial issues, the Russian sovereign assets and those issues as well. Of course, there are a lot of details, but ultimately, this also has to be about Ukraine's sovereignty, and what matters for Ukraine has to ultimately be decided by Ukraine.
We have been reading that progress seems to have been made on security guarantees. And it was for that reason I was asking, given that that seems to be what's being briefed, if there are to be security guarantees, if it does look like it's getting more concrete, what role are we playing?
So we are obviously the leading part of the coalition of the willing. And that has involved discussion between the effectively defence ministries and armed services across different nations that are all ready to be part of the coalition of the willing. So the UK is clearly a central part of that. And we've had discussions across other European nations. And we've also been discussing with the US what role they would play in terms of backing up, providing that backup for the coalition of the willing and providing those security guarantees. I totally understand why you are asking these questions and pressing on them, but you will also understand while these discussions are still underway, I think it would be premature for me to try and go into further detail when there are still discussions happening.
It's difficult though, because certain things get briefed.
Of course.
You know, Article 5 and and that this is an offer from the United States that might be withdrawn if it isn't agreed to. So these tantalising things are put into the newspapers. But as the Foreign Affairs Committee, when we're trying to hold the Foreign Office to account, we're told we can't be told even that.
I understand, and this is obviously at the point at which there are details to be published, there will of course be many opportunities to raise questions as well. But bear in mind, there's another obviously crucial thing in this, which is there's a huge amount of work that's been going on, obviously involving the US, Ukraine, also backed by European countries, about securing peace. But what we also see is, I think there are two presidents who are pursuing peace, which is President Zelensky and President Trump, but President Putin so far has just sought to escalate war and escalate conflict. And so, look, what we actually need is Russia could end this war at a stroke if they simply stopped the conflict and they stopped pursuing their invasion of Ukraine.
We want to move on to conflicts, and I think we're going to start with Gaza. And I think, Uma, you wanted to ask a question first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Last night we had really moving testimony from Reverend Jack Serra. He's from the Bethlehem Bible College, of the desperate plight of those in Gaza and the scenes of the flooding that we're seeing. And I hope that the UK will be looking at pushing on further humanitarian assistance. The question I wanted to ask is, in the last few weeks there's been a lot of coverage of the death of Ahed Tariq El-Bayouk. She was shot playing near her family's tent in Gaza. The IDF say they are now reviewing this. It's got a lot of coverage, rightly, but this is just one case. Since the ceasefire, an average of 3 children a day have been killed. That's every day. That's over 140 Palestinian children. What's Britain doing to not only rebuild Gaza, but in the short term ensure that this ceasefire, it actually is a ceasefire, and that we aren't seeing children dying every day?
I think that you're right to raise this, and the ceasefire we know is incredibly fragile, but more significantly, hundreds of people have been killed or injured since the ceasefire came into force. And obviously that raises issues about making sure that there is effective monitoring of the ceasefire process, and also that we have proper progress around the process as well. The first phase of the ceasefire agreement was obviously around the return of the hostages. That has been hugely welcome. We know there's one remaining hostage, but it's been hugely welcome. The ceasefire itself, which is hugely fragile, and the increase in humanitarian aid, which has increased, but nowhere near where it needs to be. The Civil Military Coordinating Committee that's been set up is doing some form of monitoring what is happening, but I think it's not the full framework that we would want to see. And most immediately, you talked about the flooding. There is an urgent, desperate need for more aid to go into Gaza. We need all of the crossings opened, we need the restrictions lifted, and we have to get an additional surge of aid in. We've managed to get some additional tents in by working immensely hard to get over 2,000 tents in. That is really important. But the UN has said that they need more than 80,000 tents in order to be able to help people through the winter when there's been so much damage to buildings. So that's why it's one of the continual things we are pressing every single day, is to get additional humanitarian aid and support into Gaza. It's also why we're supporting the matched fund pound for pound deck appeal in the run up to Christmas as well.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask a question about the West Bank. So violence is decreasing in Gaza, but to have peace in Palestine, there needs to be peace across all of the areas. Violence and military operations have increased in the West Bank. Food prices have tripled, which is extremely destabilising. 1,000 Palestinians have been injured in settler attacks in the last year, compared to 500 the year before. What are you doing currently to condemn the creation of the new and the expansion of the existing settlements, to ban trade with settlements, and what are the practical barriers that you're coming across for the ban, and will you be carrying out further sanctions on violent settlers?
And also, I have to say, it was part of our report that we said that there should be a ban on settlement goods being imported into the UK, and the Foreign Office have not so far accepted that.
What are those blockers that's stopping that?
Yeah. So just in terms of the settler violence, the increase in settler violence we've seen is extremely disturbing, and it continues alongside the expansion in settlements that we have also strongly condemned. We've been working internationally, not just directly, to increase pressure on that. So I put out a statement jointly with the French, German and Italian foreign ministers condemning both the scale of violence and the expansion of settlements just a couple of weeks ago, because we're so deeply concerned about the escalation of violence. And I think the number of settler violent attacks during the olive harvest in October alone, I think there were 250 recorded attacks. It's the highest it has ever been. And it is shocking and appalling in itself to have that level of settler violence, but it's also, I think, part of the broader issue about the future of Palestine. And that whilst everybody rightly is focusing on establishing the peace in Gaza, we can't lose sight of what is happening in the West Bank, and these need to be linked. It's why the establishment of the Palestinian Committee needs to also be linked into the Palestinian Authority, and we need to have that track to the two-state solution that we have obviously always championed and was part of our recognition of the state of Palestine, which is obviously the historic decision that we took and announced earlier in the autumn. So we are continuing to press those issues. And I think my hope would be that once the next phase around Gaza with the Board of Peace and the Palestinian Committee is established, that would also become an opportunity to link that more clearly with the issues around the West Bank and the reforms to the Palestinian Authority that we're also proposing. You also raised the issue, I think, around trade things. As you know, we have already said that the settlements do not benefit from the preferential trade tariffs and encourage the labelling of settlement goods. You're right that we haven't followed the approach that the Select Committee has taken, and that's not least the complexity of this, and we don't think that this is the right approach going forward. I would also say I think
it's not the right approach, or because it's too complex?
I think there's a combination of the two, but I recognise the point that the committee has made. So we have set out a whole series of things, and we've pulled back from, obviously you will know, the free trade agreement. I think what we want to see with all of this is to be part of now a positive process going forward. Now that we have the momentum around so many different countries alongside the UK joining in the recognition of the state of Palestine, we have a set of commitments not just around Gaza but also linking to the West Bank around in the discussions about the reforms and the peace process going forward. What's really important now is to bind everybody into a positive process going forward. This is deeply fragile, but we need that forward momentum, and we need to bring the West Bank into that forward process.
Thank you. I just want to expand on the settlement trade question. So as the Chair said, the committee did suggest a comprehensive ban on imports from illegal settlements. And I think the response from the department was that guidance equips individuals and businesses to make their own informed choices regarding such activities. What evidence do we have that the guidance is being followed?
So you're right that that's both the Department for Business and Trade and HMRC have recently updated their list of the non-eligible locations so that the goods in the specified locations then can't benefit from the preferential tariff treatment, and also have introduced a new document code for that. If there are any doubts about goods that have been declared as being of Israeli origin, then HMRC can undertake checks, and I'm advised will undertake checks to verify the origin of those goods to ensure fiscal compliance. I am happy to write to the committee with further detail if you would like, in terms of the work that the HMRC does on that.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Just a follow-on from that point. What are there any interventions that are taking place to prevent UK-based business or charities from actually investing in settlements? So companies that are here or charities that are in the UK in investing in expansion of settlements in the West Bank?
Well, clearly we see those as illegal settlements as well, so it is important that that is recognised.
Should not be investing in settlements.
So obviously some of these issues are DBT issues as well, so I'm very happy to provide you with further written information on that.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. I wanted to come back to the Board of Peace. Several members of the committee were in Doha for the Doha Forum a few days ago. When we were talking to Qatari ministers, they were saying the Arab position really is the current setup of the Board of Peace is unacceptable for them. And we've been lots of information in the press recently about Tony Blair no longer being a position. So I wanted to ask, what is going to be the UK's role in that Board of Peace? How have we been involved in setting it up? Are we going to hear any more about Tony Blair being involved? Will FCDBO be involved if that's not the case?
So when President Trump first published his 20-point plan, he had obviously put forward Tony Blair as part of those discussions. So that was his nomination rather than a UK or different countries being involved at that point. The discussions in terms of the composition of the Board of Peace are still underway, so there isn't a conclusion to those yet. We'd understood at one point there was a suggestion that might happen actually sometime between now and Christmas, some other suggestions that might happen now in January. I would say my personal view is that we need to move forward as rapidly as possible, but the Board of Peace should happen alongside the Palestinian Committee, because it's crucial that the Palestinian Committee is able to actually run things in the practicalities of services in Gaza. It's this principle that Palestine should be run by Palestinians. That is hugely important. What the Board of Peace does then is provide the overseeing of the peace process more widely. So I think those details, we still wait for those to be finalised, and also which countries will be involved in the Board of Peace as well. There's obviously further crucial things that need to be taken forward around the ISF, the decommissioning. But again, I would say, I think underpinning all of this has to be the huge expansion of humanitarian aid, and we can get on with that right now.
Absolutely. And going back to the ISF, which you mentioned, UK has sent some personnel, I think, to work alongside the Israelis and the Americans at the Civil Military Coordination Centre. And we've also had lots of proposals from countries like Turkey, Pakistan and Indonesia, I think, to provide troops. Why is it taking so long for the ISF framework to be established? And what is the UK's role in the CMMC, and what do you envisage our role to be in any future ISF?
So we have supplied people to the CMCC, both military and civil members in order to help with that. But that is predominantly a sort of operational coordinating work that it is doing. I think the ISF is a very different role, and we would not expect and don't intend for UK troops to be part of the ISF, although we of course always stand ready to provide planning support or training support or those kinds of issues as well. I think the US is leading discussions with potentially troop contributing countries on that, and I think really some of the issues for those countries or end up being around the mandates and the details of that, and in practice how it could work. The thing that we have also put forward some proposals on as well is around the decommissioning process, which we have suggested could learn from the decommissioning process in Northern Ireland as well. That was done very much independently, so would be a sort of independent process from the ISF. But look, all of those things, as we know, these are complicated issues, so all of these issues are still being looked at and still to be resolved.
Thank you. One final question. As we are embedded in the CMMC, and you've said the humanitarian situation leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, the number of people that have died due to the flooding, the huge restriction in tents, the small numbers of additional trucks the UN is being allowed to deliver through, and Rafah crossing is still closed, of course. What influence do we have? What more can we do to ensure that gets in? And do we need to be thinking about further measures against the Israelis in order to encourage them to open these options up?
Well, the aid going into Gaza has increased since the ceasefire. My view is that it's still a long way short of where we need to get to. And that's partly why I went to Jordan to see the warehouses, and just one of the World Food Programme warehouses that I went to, which had UK aid as part of it. There was enough wheat there to feed 700,000 people for a month, and yet it was stuck in Jordan and had been there for some of it for 8 months because the Jordanian route into Gaza was still closed. There have been some further discussions, and we are continuing to raise this at every opportunity about potentially opening the Jordanian route, but we're not there yet, and I just think we need to urgently get the Jordanian route opened. We've also been putting the pressure on. We've managed to get the 2,500 tents that we've managed to get in. Again, those have been waiting for very many months. That's enough tents to help shelter 12,000 people, so it is really important, but it's still not on the scale that the UN is saying is needed. And so whilst the number of trucks has gone up, we still need to go much further. So my argument with this is obviously we need the Israeli government to lift restrictions, but my argument is also that this should be part of the push forward with the Board of Peace and with the Palestinian Committee to also get a surge in aid, because I just think it's crucial, especially as winter is drawing in.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, so you said in your earlier answer humanitarian aid could be delivered now and should be delivered urgently, and now you're saying it should be part of the next phase.
I just think at every stage, everything should happen now. Yeah. So we're calling for it to happen now, but also in addition, as part of the establishment of the Board of Peace and the Palestinian Committee, that is a further opportunity to further increase and have new arrangements in place to make sure we can get aid as rapidly as possible to those who need it.
Can I ask you though, because many of the charities have been in touch with us about this, and that is about, so obviously the Israelis are not going to allow UNRWA to play a role in delivering aid to Gaza. Much of our aid goes through the UN, but there's also aid from that we use that will be implemented through grants that we give to charities, and obviously a lot of British people are giving to those charities, but they can't play a role in Gaza at the moment because of the registration problems. Because Israel is insisting that there is this registration process. I understand that Save the Children has been rejected by the Israelis. There are a number of charities that are British charities. And if we have a leading role within, as I understand it, CMCC, when it comes to the delivery of aid, and we can't even get British doctors into Gaza, what are we going to do about it?
I have raised this exact issue about the registration of charities directly with the Israeli Foreign Minister, and we have raised it continually with the Israeli government and also through the CMCC and with all those involved in the process. We will continue to raise this. There are a lot of very good, very well experienced charities who need to be able to operate, and we're just preventing very practical improvements, practical delivery that could take place now by the continuation of these restrictions. So the UK government's strong view, my personal strong view, is that these restrictions on charities need to be lifted. We need to get them in.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Foreign Secretary. I just wanted to ask you a further question just to get a bit of a better understanding about our role in the CMCC. You mentioned that we have civil and military personnel out there. Could you provide a bit more detail about how many individuals we have out there and what kind of briefings and how regularly you're getting briefings from them about the work that's going on?
So we currently have 15 people in there. Those are predominantly military staff, but some are civil as well. But it does vary because people go maybe for short periods of time and the rotations and so on. So as of today, I think there are 15 people there. I think the role, this is a transition role, is the reality, I think, of the CMCC as the planning takes place for the Palestinian Committee and for the Board of Peace. So some of what it has been doing is generally some of the practical issues around some of the planning for the humanitarian aid, some of the planning for the next steps on the ISF and Palestinian police and so on. But I think the reality is that the CMCC is not going to be what delivers the next stage in the 20-point peace process. It's a transition.
Just because I understand that, I mean, they suggest that something like 24,000 trucks of aid and goods have gone into Gaza since, and I think they said that at the end of last month. Obviously, you know, you've expressed that more aid has got through, but concerns, we all want to see lots more aid getting through into the people who need it. Just trying to understand, given that we've got approximately 15 personnel there, are you getting regular briefings from them, or are you planning perhaps to visit the CMCC yourself, given its important role in this interim transitional phase?
So yes, we do get regular briefings. Some of the issues around the truck monitoring, the target was part of it was, I think, 250 UN-related trucks a day. That is sometimes being hit, but not being consistently hit. But I actually think this is much more than just the number of trucks. We know that there are some commercial trucks as well, but the total number is not delivering the scale of winter support that we need. So I think part of the reason we're continuing to press the issues around the humanitarian aid is because it needs to be relative to the need on the ground, not simply about that the process is increasing. It's good that the trucks have been increasing, but we're still nowhere near enough compared to where we need to get to.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask one final question just on this, because you mentioned in an earlier answer the broader issue about the future of Palestine and moving towards a two-state solution. I just wanted to ask you about the Palestinian Authority. I understand that the government provides funding to them. I just wondered whether you could provide a bit of detail about how much funding we've provided since July of last year and what the plans are for next year. And if there's any work that you're doing to ensure that the reforms that we need to see around education, as you know, many of the textbooks contain anti-Semitic content, and making sure that all forms of pay to slay and the new guises that they're being paid under are stopped.
Yeah. It's a quick question.
Yeah, well, but an important one.
It is an important one.
Let me write to you about the precise detail for the 18-month period so I give you the right figure. There are some specific reforms, including around the education textbooks, including around welfare reforms and so on, that we are absolutely just monitoring the details because, and I've spoken directly to President Abbas about those and the commitments the Palestinian Authority have made to drive those reforms through. Those are crucial. In addition to that, we are also providing further expertise on the kinds of reforms that we think are needed more broadly, because although there are some particular, most kind of challenging issues that absolutely need to be reformed, there are broader reforms that we think we need to make, that the Palestinian Authority need to make in order to be part of this peace process more widely, and happy to write further on that to give you more detail, more time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry to cut you short. Sir John.
Foreign Secretary, if I might move you on to another issue. This committee, you might be aware, has pressed strongly for the appointment of an envoy for arbitrary detention. And we also requested that the Foreign Office set out a rough criteria of what would qualify. Your predecessor was reluctant to give the criteria, but did say that the Foreign Office was working at pace to make an appointment. I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you see arbitrary detention and how to define it, and also when we can expect to see the appointment.
I do want to introduce this appointment. I think it's important and I think it would be very valuable. So we are taking that forward, also looking sort of more widely at some of the envoys, but I think this is important, and so we will be making that appointment. More widely...
I'll just ask when... Your predecessor said working at pace. So
and I hope you will appreciate that obviously sort of post-reshuffle that's obviously has added to the time to do this. So, but I can tell you that those discussions are underway. So obviously would try to do so as swiftly as possible. In terms of the definition, there isn't really any agreed international definition of this, and some of this is also reflects different kind of legal approaches and so on as well. And the FCDO doesn't really have effectively a fact-finding ability to assess individual cases. What we can do, however, is strongly take up consular cases, as we have obviously been doing around Jimmy Lai, where we are calling for his immediate release. And there are other cases where we have people who need to go through a criminal justice process in different countries, but we still provide them with important consular support through those processes as well.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to raise the specific case of Jimmy Lai. Yeah. I mean, you made a very strong statement in the chamber yesterday. You told us that you had called in the Chinese ambassador. But previous cases where releases of individuals held have been obtained have been achieved by applying some hard pressure and holding out the prospect of better relations if the release can be obtained. So can you tell us what actual actions that you can take to put pressure on the Chinese authorities, and in particular whether or not you and the Prime Minister would make it clear that a visit from the Prime Minister can only go ahead after the release of Jimmy Lai?
So we have obviously, as you're obviously there for the statement tomorrow, been very strong in our condemnation of this clearly politically motivated prosecution, and also called for the immediate release of Jimmy Lai. He is 78, and there are immediate humanitarian concerns here. And even simply on a humanitarian basis, we would urge the Chinese authorities to release him immediately. He has already been incarcerated for 5 years, in addition to our grave concerns about the national security law and the way in which this violates the declaration that was signed jointly by the UK and China. There is a period now between the verdict and also the sentencing, in which we are making these representations in the strongest of terms, and also in which we are coordinating with other allies as well. We have been discussing this with other G7 countries. We've also been discussing this with the US. You will have seen the clear statements from the US, including from the Secretary of State. We've seen the support from President Trump as well for Jimmy Lai Lai's immediate release. That is the stage we are at currently, is putting on the strongest pressure that we can between now and the sentencing.
Surely the strongest pressure we could put on would be to make clear that a visit by the UK Prime Minister cannot happen whilst a UK citizen is incarcerated in a Hong Kong jail.
Well, I think, as I've made clear, our focus right now is to get the humanitarian release of Jimmy Lai, and I hope that will be everybody's agreed objective, and it's why we are seeking to have as many other countries as possible. The EU also put out a strong statement yesterday calling for the immediate release of Jimmy Lai, and we seek to get as many other countries joining us as possible in putting that pressure on.
Okay. We move on to Sudan. Given the UK's historic role and its connections with Sudan, is it in a position to be able to be an honest broker in the terrible situation that there is there? And I know it's absolutely, of course, the right thing for us to be giving aid and assist that sort of assistance, but there needs to be work done on a political solution, on a diplomatic solution, and we are the penholder. So what efforts are we making, and is it even possible for us to be able to find a political solution to Sudan?
Yeah. I've substantially increased the Foreign Office work on Sudan. I'm deeply worried about Sudan. This is already the worst humanitarian crisis of the 21st century. And I'm really worried that there will be further atrocities. And we have obviously seen the horrendous scenes from El Fasher, and the fact that having met some of the Sudanese community volunteers, those who work in the emergency response rooms, including a woman who runs some of the services providing support for women victims of sexual violence, the way in which rape is being used as a weapon of war, the mass executions, is absolutely horrendous what is happening there. I think there's also wider, as well as the humanitarian crisis, the risk of famine to millions of people. There are also wider security risks here of failed state, of extremists being able to exploit the instability, and of course migration risks, the huge number of refugees who are currently in Chad or in Egypt or other countries as well. So yes, I think the UK can play a role here. You will know there is a Quad established which involves the US, the UAE, the Saudis and Egyptians. And I have been in touch, I am in continual touch with all 4 Quad members. Speaking to foreign ministers, I spoke to Marco Rubio about Sudan last week. I also spoke to the US Special Envoy, and I have spoken to foreign ministers in the last few weeks continually of the other 3 member countries. So I think our role is partly about maintaining the pressure around the need to keep up the momentum, the work that the Quad has committed to, but also being able to try and facilitate and support some of the more detailed work about what does it take to get to a humanitarian truce, and then also, if you can get to a humanitarian truce, what is then the political process that needs to follow from that. In terms of our role as penholder, we stand ready to put forward further UN resolutions. As and when we can, you'll realise we obviously took a resolution to the Human Rights Council as well, which was strongly supported comprehensively from across the globe as well.
So the lead doesn't come from us as penholders at the UN. The lead comes from the Quad, and we stand ready to give assistance.
I think the Quad, the US obviously does have substantial ability to put pressure on. The countries, the Saudi, Egypt and UAE also have extensive influence as well, and engagement in this. Our role, I think, is to continue to work with all of them, and also to push to keep pressure on through the UN as well. So the crisis that's happening in Sudan is so complicated and is at risk of getting worse, and the fracturing and fragmenting of the different sides, and the willingness to pursue atrocities as well, is this requires, I think, the kind of broad international engagement. What I have called for is that we should have the same level of international engagement and energy around Sudan as we had around Gaza. In the run-up to the ceasefire in Gaza, we had huge international engagement from a range of different countries right across the world. Clearly, there was the crucial role played by the US, but also the role of the Arab League. There was the role of other countries like the UK who signed up to the recognition of Palestine. So all of those countries all being part of something together really mattered. I think we still need to see that on Sudan.
Thank you. With 12 million people displaced, 150,000 people killed in the conflict, and over 30 million people requiring humanitarian assistance, you can see exactly why you are putting such priority on this. You mentioned UAE being part of the Quad. I'd just like to ask a question about UK arms export licences. So it's alleged that there's identification of British armaments on Sudanese battlefields that have been exported via the UAE. Have the UK government reviewed its assessment of those UK arms export licences? And what representations have you made to the UAE government on this matter?
So I take any allegations like this incredibly seriously, and since I think there were allegations made about 3 items being sourced to the UK that were found in Sudan, since those allegations were made, we have reviewed, or I've insisted reviewed, 2,000 export licences. And in those 3 cases, the case of those 3 items, they were not covered by current licences, by any current licences over the last 5 years. I think there was a seatbelt, a target, and an engine component. None of those have been included in current licences, export licences from the UK. However, if there are any further allegations that are ever raised, I will take them immensely seriously. We do have very strict rules to prevent any diversion as well. Then more widely, I have discussed issues around weapons supplies to Sudan with all the members of the Quad, so with the UAE, with the Saudis, with Egypt, and also with the US as well, because obviously some of what we need to do is to be restricting any weapons going into Sudan. We also have to recognise, though, they have got an awful lot of weapons already in Sudan, and therefore the most urgent thing is getting the humanitarian truce in place and trying to identify what it would take to have sufficient pressure on both sides that they pull back from the brink of further conflict and atrocities.
And talking about the current potential atrocities, what immediate actions are you taking to ensure that the atrocities witnessed in El Fasher, which you mentioned, are prevented from occurring in Kordofan?
Yeah,
right now.
This is the thing that actually really worries me most. Of all of the different things that I deal with at the moment, this is the thing that worries me most, because we have seen horrendous atrocities take place, and there is, I think, a real risk of further atrocities. That's why we are, we are seeking to maintain the pressure. We announced new sanctions on RSF members around the atrocities that have taken place in El Fasher. We're ready to use any of those levers that we have in order to put pressure on. We have also, as part of the Human Rights Council resolution that we put forward, was also about a fact-finding mission, because as Tom Fletcher has said, the El Fasher is a crime scene, and therefore we need to also be able to gather the evidence of the atrocities in order to hold people to account. And to be clear, whether it is through sanctions, whether it's through fact-finding, whether it's through the work, through other international work, that there must be accountability for atrocities. But that also, ultimately, it needs the truce. We want to see a ceasefire, a permanent peace, but immediately can we just get a truce that pulls back from further conflict in the Kordofans right now in order to prevent further atrocities taking place. And that's what a lot of the discussions, that's why the conversations that I've had with Masad Boulos, who is the US Special Envoy, and also Marco Rubio, you'll have seen both the US Secretary of State and the President, and President Trump also expressing deep concern about the scale of atrocities taking place. So just trying to get the maximum pressure on. We also have the UK Special Envoy as well, who has been engaging with the SAF as well as the issues around the sanctions for the RSF. So we are engaging on both sides to try and put maximum pressure on.
Thank you. And you mentioned the peace process and the political process. It's constantly raised with me and others that there aren't enough women involved in this process. It's when you see the peace talks, it's a lot of men going in and out, and the women of Sudan are absolutely feeling that they should be involved. We've got very good experience of involving women in the peace process in Northern Ireland, which has been shared a lot with women's groups in Sudan as well. So what, as the pen holder, as so involved with the Quad and with other ways, what influence can the UK government bring to ensure that more women, and the right women, are involved in this, to make sure that the peace will be lasting and it will be something which will be for all people of Sudan?
So one of the things that we are seeking to do, including working with other countries like Norway, who've also experienced in these areas, is to try and work to build up some civilian capacity in Sudan, because there's an immediate issue about getting the warring sides to pull back from the brink and to agree to a humanitarian truce. But if it is to be sustained, we need a civilian transition. And that means we need to be able to strengthen Sudanese voices, the civil society in Sudan. I have met with some of those community activists who are just showing incredible bravery at the moment by providing response through emergency response rooms. It is crucial that women's voices are a central part of that. So as part of the work we look to do to try and build some civilian capacity, as part of also the 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security resolution at the UN, which the then Labour government was a crucial part of establishing that resolution. That was all about recognising that not just there needs to be protection for women victims of war and conflict, including from things like sexual violence, but also that women's voices need to be heard as part of the peace process, that women need to be the strong voices for security and for peace. So we highlighted that 25th anniversary as part of the work I'm trying to do to strengthen the work around women and girls through the Foreign Office. We need to make sure that those principles are now taken forward in the work we seek to do to strengthen the civil society in Sudan.
We move on to Syria because we're a bit tight for time. Sorry, Fleur.
Thank you, Chair. There have been a number of appalling ISIS-linked attacks in recent days, so the devastating anti-Semitic attack in Australia. But we're also seeing an uptick in ISIS-linked violence in Syria, and a number of American servicemen were killed over the weekend. I wanted to ask about our response to ISIS in Syria. What can you tell us about that? And are we reviewing our position in light of these recent incidents?
Yeah. So I think there's been, in recent years, if you go back maybe 10 years or so, the focus, the security focus of the Foreign Office and actually also of the Home Office would really have been around counter-terrorism threats. And the nature of those sorts of organised groups operating in ungoverned spaces, and the need as to what the strategy should be on that. Most recently, in the most recent years, we have seen the growing state threats. Now, whether that be around Russia and Ukraine, whether that be around Iran and nuclear threats, or those threats that we have seen in the UK as state-backed threats, hostile state-backed threats and organised hybrid threats as well. But part of the discussions that I've had in the Foreign Office about the work that we need to focus on security, I've been very clear that we can't simply move everything to focusing around some of those state-backed threats, because actually you can see signs of some of those terrorism threats starting to grow again. and starting to escalate, and that we have to be immensely vigilant around that. In terms of Syria, we, I think, want to continue our engagement with the Syrian government. This is an opportunity with the Syrian government to help them deliver a more stable, free, prosperous future for Syrians, but also to help establish effectively a governed space that is safer and that allows us to work together to tackle those organised extremist threats. You'd have seen the commitments that the Syrian government made when in the US on joining the international coalition against Islamist extremism, and we are continuing to work with the Syrian government on that. I welcome the Syrian Foreign Minister Al-Shabani to the UK in November as well. So it's something that you would expect me to be very alive to, having come from the Home Office to the Foreign Office, but it's certainly something that we will continue to focus on, not just in Syria, but more broadly.
Brilliant. Thank you, Foreign Secretary. And I'm glad you mentioned working with the Syrian government on normalising the situation there and building a more inclusive and representative country. One final question on this issue. If you could say a bit more about our work on those issues around governance and supporting the Syrian government, and also when might we see a UK embassy be reopening in Syria to support that wider effort?
So we want to continue to keep increasing our engagement with Syria. We are continuing to offer them support on the political transition. Rightly, you talked about it, this needs to be inclusive, and they need to ensure that as the sort of democracy and the governance develops, that it can be the government can be fully inclusive and also protect human rights and deal with sectarian violence as well within Syria, and we continue to engage with them on that. We are exploring options for a more permanent UK government presence. We are continuing to visit, we're already regular visitors to Damascus, but that is something that is under consideration.
Thank you. Let's move to the States. Edward.
Thank you, Chair. Foreign Secretary, I wanted to ask about the US National Security Strategy document that was published earlier this month. It talks about restoring Europe's civilization and Western identity. It talks of Europe facing the prospect of civilization erasure and facing the loss of national identities and becoming a majority non-European. I was wondering whether or not you agree with that assessment.
Obviously, look, this is the US National Security Strategy. We published the UK National Security Strategy in the summer, so we take responsibility for our approach. The US will set out their national security strategy. There are areas in their strategy where obviously we have that, and also actually more widely, not just simply about their strategy, but in the approach that they take, that we clearly have shared vision, for example, and areas where we respect their different priorities, and also, of course, areas where it wouldn't surprise you that we would take a different view. And certainly on some of the points that you make, I think you wouldn't surprise you that we'd take a different view on the strength of European democracies, the strength of our freedoms, our support for communities, and our social cohesion as well. And I think if you want to talk about the centuries of civilization that we have to be proud of, our cultural industries are stronger than they have ever been. It's a more important part of our economy than it has ever been. We have strong and diverse communities who are proud to be British, who are an incredibly important part of the kind of country that we are, and we celebrate that and will continue to do so.
In terms of the US approach to Europe, it talks about European governments' subversion of the democratic process. It says the US will promote the influence of patriotic European parties and cultivate resistance to Europe's current trajectory. I'm wondering whether or not you think it is acceptable for the US to meddle in the democratic process of the UK and European countries to promote political parties that have overtly Trumpian views.
Well, I think, look, we have When we work with different long-standing allies, the US is a huge long-standing ally. We have very deep cooperation on intelligence, on security. They continue to be closest ally in a whole series of national security areas, and that continues. Of course, we have differences of view around all sorts of areas, and we respect their democracy. We obviously expect all democracies to be.
We expect that they don't respect our democracy if they're willing to meddle in it.
Well, we expect all democracies to be respected and all nations to be respected. And we, of course, can have robust differences of view about particular political issues and continue to be so. And I would also just say I regard my party as a patriotic party as well, and will continue to be very clear about the strength of our country. I'm very proud of Britain and the diverse country that we are, the creative, dynamic country that we are, and also the strong ally that we are to all sorts of countries across the world.
So I guess where I'm driving with this is that given the policies and the world view that is outlined in the US National Security Strategy document, given that on publication the Kremlin spokesperson welcomed it as largely consistent with our view of the world, how reliable a partner is the US to the UK, given how different our worldviews are?
So I think working with the US in practice on a series of different issues. So the discussions that I've had, repeated discussions I've had with the US Secretary of State, repeated discussions that we've had, obviously the Prime Minister has many close discussions with President Trump, that we've had the state visit and so on. We've had a series of areas where we have strong shared interest in the economic and tech development, for example. That was part of the tech partnership. We discussed, in fact, while I was in Washington, the continued strong support from the US for NATO, for example, but at the same time, recognising, and we agree with this, that European countries need to do more and contribute more to their defence. We strongly agree with that. And also the work that we are doing both around Gaza and the peace process and around Sudan and the peace process as well. Of course, there are areas where we take a different view and where we will raise those with the US and discuss those, and I have done so as well. And that includes being very clear that I see strength in the way in which Europe is responding to Ukraine, for example. We need to do that alongside our allies. This peace process with the US is hugely important. But I think that the work that European countries have been doing in order to respond to that Russia threat is immensely important.
Well, I agree with you on the need for Europe to spend more and do more on defence. I'm just wondering, when you're talking to the US about NATO, given the national security strategy, so he says that the US stands ready to help, potentially through more favourable treatment on commercial matters, technology sharing and defence procurement. That doesn't really extend to the full gambit of NATO responsibilities. So in a Trumpian presidency, how confident are you in the US fulfilling its Article 5 obligations?
Well, that's actually one of the issues that I discussed while I was in Washington, and where the US administration, Secretary of State, were very clear with me, the continued and strong support that the US continue to show for NATO, and that is what we have seen as part of the NATO discussions. It's also some of the issues that have been discussed around security guarantees as part of the Ukraine discussions. Again, immensely important. Europe does have to do more. It was part of our discussions at the NATO Foreign Ministers, and that's why we're increasing our defence spending. That's why other countries are also doing so as well. But I think that we've always said that NATO is at the heart of our security. It's immensely important to our security and will continue to be so.
I'll move on to Rich.
Thank you, Chair. Staying with the question of the US national security strategy, it characterises Europe as blocking peace between Ukraine and Russia. How does the British government respond to that characterisation when you engage with the United States government?
So we can discuss areas that we agree and also areas that we disagree, and that's, I think, always been the case. I've just been very clear publicly that I see Europe's response has shown considerable strength in the way in which we've had so many countries, actually not just in Europe but really across the world, being prepared to join the coalition of the willing that the Prime Minister and the French President established and co-chair. That has been really important. I think the continued investment to support Ukraine, to support Ukraine's defences and also to support Ukraine's energy infrastructure that's taking place at the moment, and our continued commitment, the fact that so many European countries are increasing defence spending now in response to the real threat that we face from Russia. And I think you have heard some of the things that the head of MI6 said yesterday. I would really just reiterate this. The threat from Russia is not simply about the threat to Ukraine. The threat from Russia to the stability and security of Europe is very real. We should be very clear-eyed about that, whether it's the nature of hybrid threats, whether it's the kinds of military intervention we've obviously seen in terms of the threat to Ukraine, whether it's other kinds of deliberate cyber disinformation threats and so on, or threats to undersea cables, the broad range of threats that are posed by Russia that we need to take immensely seriously. And I think Europe is strongly pulling together in response to those threats.
Foreign Secretary will be glad to hear that in the new year we will give you a new report on disinformation that we're in the process of putting together. And before I move back to Ukraine, I think you had a question on United States, and then I'll move back to you on Ukraine, if that's all right.
Just very briefly, on following on from the other questions about US policy, there seems to be a pattern of attack by the US government on British Muslims, in particular on the Mayor of London. I'm a very, very proud London MP, proud of our diversity, as you mentioned. What would you say and comment about those attacks on our Mayor and the false information given about our fantastic capital city?
Yeah, I think Sadiq Khan is doing a brilliant job as London Mayor. You see he's delivering for Londoners, and we see the strong support of, in many surveys, London being rated as the best capital city to live in anywhere in the world. So I think we see the rich economy, the strength of our communities across London, and I strongly support the work the Mayor is doing.
Well, we've got 3 London MPs on the panel here. I agree with that. Richard.
Foreign Secretary, you spoke a moment ago about security guarantees for Ukraine. We've heard overnight some quite positive words said about US security guarantees, described variously as Article 5-like, very strong guarantees, platinum standards. Chancellor Merz said US security guarantees are remarkable. Please, could you describe how these security guarantees might operate and what the UK contribution might be to them?
So I'm going to just, I think, recognise that some of these discussions are still ongoing. We believe that significant progress has been made on security guarantees, but because those discussions are not yet concluded, I don't want to preempt the conclusion of those discussions. The whole point about having the security guarantees is obviously to ensure that Putin cannot just pause and come again, that it doesn't just become a pause for him simply to rearm, to strengthen his military resources and then launch further attacks, whether it be on Ukraine or on anybody else. And that's why the security guarantees are so important. There has to be some deterrence in this process against Russian aggression. So those are the issues that we are looking at. That's why we've all talked about a just and lasting peace. But I think, unfortunately, apologies to you and to the committee, it would be premature for me to talk about the detail of that at this stage.
It would go further than the mere reassurance force that has been discussed up to now.
I think, look, we have to all be able to have that confidence. Ukraine has to have the confidence that that any agreement doesn't simply mean that Putin then goes further again 12 months later or 6 months later. But those are also about guarantees for other countries concerned about security and stability across Europe as well. The only other thing I would then just reiterate, and the point that I made at the beginning, is that ultimately, we have huge amount of work underway between Ukraine and the US and supported by European countries. Frankly, I do not yet see commitment from Russia to sign up to peace, and they could do so at any point. They could sign up to a peace process, and actually that is where we need the pressure. That's one of the reasons why we're continuing with the pressure around sanctions on Russia, the economic pressure, and also pursuing the issues around Russian sovereign assets as well.
What's about safe?
I wasn't planning to. But, okay. I'm curious then to know about the UK-EU cooperation around arms, and specifically the shortcomings around SAFE that we've seen in recent weeks. Might we see any further re-engagement between the UK and the European Commission on SAFE talks in the new year?
Look, the timescale and the cost made this not value for money. We were always very clear we needed a value for money, but as you know, we continue with strong defence partnerships anyway. There's a whole series of different ways, including third country terms that we can be part of, all of those programmes, and we continue to have direct defence agreements and partnerships with a number of different countries. We've seen the new agreements, obviously, with Norway and other countries as well. But we're not currently proposing to reopen the discussions around SAFE.
Isn't it disgraceful that the Canadians can get access to SAFE on the basis of paying in £10 million and euros, and we have to pay £6 billion? I mean, what is going on? You know, we play a leading role in the defence of Europe, and why are we not allowed into SAFE?
Well, as I think we've made clear, we're only prepared to be part of arrangements that work as value for money. And I think that has to be a guiding principle for us. But we have a lot of different defence partnerships, whether it be around frigates, whether it be around GCAP, whether it be around different forms of not just defence cooperation, but defence procurement with other European countries, that we will continue to do so. The work that we did, having seen the carrier strike group on its return from the Indo-Pacific as it came back through the Mediterranean, the partnership with Italy, the partnership with Norway, those partnerships are immensely important. They will continue to be so. We will continue to be part of a strong defence arrangements with other European countries.
Okay. You want to go on to Russian sovereign assets, Phil?
Yes, Foreign Secretary, on the Russian sovereign assets, are you able to say what progress has been made in seizing those assets held both here in the UK and further afield?
So the assets are frozen, and you'll have seen there was a further vote in the EU Council, I think last week, to sustain the freezing of the Russian sovereign assets. What we want to be able to do, though, is to mobilise those assets to help support Ukraine and to be able to provide the investment for Ukraine. So UK supports the reparation loan proposal that the European Commission have put forward, and I am continuing to have discussions with other European countries, other foreign ministers, about their support for the making sure that those Russian sovereign assets can be mobilised to support both both military support and also economic support as well for Ukraine. Frankly, I just think that Russia should pay for the damage that they have done to Ukraine, and that's why this is the right thing to do, as well as increasing the pressure on Russia to come to the table.
And this isn't just a discussion about Russian sovereign assets. Almost 4 years after Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we're still in a position where the £2.5 billion proceeds of the sale of Chelsea Football Club tied to Roman Abramovich is still frozen. When are we going to see the proceeds of that sale dispersed to support Ukraine?
I've been working extensively on this and hope to be able to update the committee as soon as possible on this. At the moment, we have been doing a huge amount of work over the last few months and hope to be able to provide a progress update to the committee very soon.
Might it be possible to write to us with a bit more information?
I certainly can, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Foreign Secretary. You recently warned about an escalation in hybrid threats from malign foreign states who are seeking to undermine democracies across Europe. And I think we've missed a statement in the House of Commons today on electoral resilience because we're sitting in committee. But I wondered if you could tell us how you're making this a priority within the FCDO.
Yeah, so I think you'll have heard the statement announced today was about I think a further review now into foreign malign interference into elections, but we have seen this already happening in countries across the world, and I know this is something that you and the committee have been looking into, but if we look at for example, in Moldova, where there were fake websites for political parties with fake policies, deliberately trying to increase hostility towards candidates that, frankly, Russia didn't like. We've seen information being laundered or through news or so-called news websites and then re-laundered through other websites right across Africa, for example, with false information about the Ukrainian president and his wife. So we've seen deliberate things. This particularly we have seen these Russia-backed organisations driving this, and this is, look, there was, I think, disinformation started under the Soviets, I think, probably back in the 1920s. But this is on an industrial scale. At that time, it would have been propaganda leaflets and so on. Now, this is industrial scale. Disinformation, making the most of algorithms and so on in order to be able to destabilise it.
Are you satisfied with the response that we currently have in terms of the response across Europe, by NATO? Because it strikes me that beyond fact-checking services, there's very little in terms of hard power or strong soft power that is actually taking place to rebut some of this stuff.
So I think there's a sort of mix of things that we can do, and I look forward to your committee's report as well and to your recommendations. What we are seeking to do now is to coordinate and to particularly coordinate with other NATO allies, but coordinate more widely on this. We've introduced now a whole series of sanctions. I think we have sanctioned, I will correct this in writing if I've got the wrong figure, but in my head we've sanctioned 38 different Russia-backed organisations in the last year for disinformation, malign, deliberately orchestrated industrial disinformation and false information.
What impact those sanctions?
So we have seen the impact of some of those as a result of those sanctions, them then also losing their platforms and being unable to operate. Now, of course, the challenge with this kind of thing is to then identify when they simply re-emerge somewhere else in the system. So increasing our coordinated monitoring, but also being able to shine the spotlight on them, because some of the way in which they seek to get their power is by hiding in the shadows. So the very fact of shining a coordinated spotlight on them is an important part of diffusing the power that they have, but also then the process of using sanctions, using those kinds of additional powers and things against them as well, and looking more broadly at how we see this as part of hybrid warfare, of hybrid threats, of hybrid some of the cyber threats and things as well. So that requires a coordinated approach, not just from any one country operating alone, but is why we've also coordinated with some of our sanctions, coordinating with the EU Commission, for example, on some of their sanctions as well.
one final question from me. Returning to the issue of the EU and looking towards Europe for European security and Britain's leading role in that, and the fact that talks on SAFE broke down, shouldn't you be clearer in your condemnation of the Commission for its role in subverting what democratic leaders in Europe have stated as their aim, which is to work together on defence?
Yeah, answer.
Well, I think on the issues around sanctions, we've had very strong coordinated work with the European Commission. Some of the work, for example, the Russian sovereign assets work, again, has been very close between us and the European Commission. There are other areas, obviously, where the strongest partnerships are directly with individual member states, whether that be through direct individual partnerships around defence procurement, or whether that be around groups, the fact that we've sometimes worked with the E4, the fact that we've sometimes worked with different groups of European countries as well. So I think it will be different on different things. Look, we don't agree with where the SAFE discussions got to, but we are part of a much bigger, broader defence cooperation, not just with our European allies, but also with NATO, and that remains important, especially at a time like this.
Thank you.
Okay. Afra, you want to talk about China?
Thank you. Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Your predecessor agreed to come before the committee and talk us through the China audit once it was published. However, since then, the committee has not received any update. And of course, your predecessor did make a brief statement in the House to explain why it would not be published, saying instead that small elements would be incorporated into the national security strategy. And we're told that much of the audit is classified. Would you agree that the British public needs to know the contents of the audit if it's to be able to work within the guidelines contained in it?
So I think that there are some issues which are security related. Look, given that we have recognised some of the national security threats that China poses, you would not expect us to publish details around that. And I don't think any of the Five Eyes partners have published an overarching China strategy in that way for exactly that reason. I understand that we have offered the committee a private briefing on some of those China issues, and I would extend that offer again to be able to give you some direct further briefing that we may not be able to provide publicly on some of the issues around China. It's, the complexity of our engagement with China is that it both poses national security threats and also is our third largest trading partner. We have some of the specific historic issues around Hong Kong, as we've discussed earlier on in the session around Jimmy Lai and other issues around Hong Kong. But we also have the wider issues that might range from climate change cooperation or trading issues through to some of those really kind of economic security threats and issues as well. So some of the areas that I have been focusing on around China since I took up this brief as Foreign Secretary include strengthening some of the security approaches around some of the cyber threats approaches, pursuing further analysis on some of the wider economic security issues, just for example, things like the supply of critical minerals, for example, or looking at some of the wider issues in terms of our critical national infrastructure here in the UK as well.
Thank you, that's really helpful, and we will definitely take you up on your offer of a private briefing, I'm sure. Just to note, though, that I was of the understanding that a number of UK allies and partners, including the Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, Finland and Germany, have all published explicit national China strategies.
Yes, I think some European countries have, but not Five Eyes countries.
And if you talked about just now the kind of wide remit of areas that our relationship with China touches on. What I'm trying to understand is if the majority of the audit is classified at a level beyond what most people working in the civil service could see, indeed so classified that up to this point even the committee hasn't been allowed to see it. How can we expect government departments to be able to implement it effectively and work together across different departments to make sure that it's properly seen through?
So I think...
I'm so sorry, before you answer that, I think I probably ought to just put for the record that Sir John and I are both Privy Councillors, and we could have a private briefing on this, and thank you for giving the offer again, but because we work as a team, it's quite difficult if some of us had information and the others didn't, and that's why you just referenced, that not even the committee can see the China audit, and although John and I might be able to get a sight of some of it, we're not able to see the whole of the China audit. Sorry to interrupt.
And I think my point is not just that the committee can't see the audit, but actually probably most people working in the civil service, you can tell me if I'm wrong, don't have the security clearance necessary to see the audit, and therefore if there are things that need to be implemented and departments that need to be working together, just like to understand how you see that happening.
So I think the audit was really a process to drive the approach that the government takes, and also fed into the national security strategy, which is public. It fed into a series of other approaches that are public, whether that be around our trading approaches, whether that be around our national security strategy, and so on. So it has fed into the broader public process. The areas where I'm interested in us being able to do more is to look in a bit more detail at some of those economic issues, because there are areas where it's clear that actually we can have strong partnerships, where we can have benefit from greater investment and trade. And the Prime Minister highlighted some of these in his recent speech, where he set out some of the areas. It could be some of the cultural areas, for example, because cultural industries is a hugely important part of the UK economy. But there are other areas, including around defence, including around some of the sensitive security issues, where actually we should not have Chinese investment, because national security ultimately comes first. So I think us being able to do the further work around some of those areas, and also to look at some of the supply chains around the world, and some of us making sure that the approach, for example, to critical minerals and to our supply of critical minerals doesn't end up being restricted as a result of us failing to understand some of the decisions that China and some other countries are also taking across the world around critical mineral supply.
Thank you. You'll be aware that the Intelligence and Security Committee yesterday published their annual report, which highlights the inadequacies of the government's approach towards China. And in particular, the report says that given the extent of the threat posed by China, and particularly that of its interference operations, they're concerned to see the government dragging its heels on whether to add China to the enhanced tier of FIRS, so the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. Given that China poses the biggest threat to the UK through transnational repression, cyber attacks and malign activities, why are they not on the enhanced tier of FIRS alongside Russia and Iran?
So each country is considered separately and differently, because countries obviously in very different circumstances and very different kinds of threats or challenges or opportunities in some cases as well. So it's right that each country should be considered separately. And I think the Security Minister, because obviously this is a Home Office lead issue, the Security Minister has been clear that we keep all of this under review and continuing to look at what the next steps are around FIRS as well. But alongside that, there are a series of other security tools that we have. There's obviously the sort of first tier of FIRS that applies more widely. But what we've also been doing is increasing, for example, the training for every single police force on state-backed threats and on transnational repression, increasing some of the intelligence and security investment, the agency's investment, to be able to address some of the state threats and challenges which have clearly grown as well, and also the use of sanctions. So we are increasingly using sanctions. We've just sanctioned two China-based entities around cyber threats, for example. And we are also increasing the use of sanctions, including in China and India, around the backing for Russia's war effort in Ukraine and some of the Russian oil and gas operations as well. So we can use the sanctions, we can use other security measures, and also the sort of security and intelligence side of things as well, and also looking at what further legislation might be needed in any of these areas.
I'd like to ask you about the plans for the new Chinese embassy. As you know, the China Super Embassy planning application is causing a lot of concern for many people in the UK who oppose the regime and for others. The current proposal will see the embassy built in a prime strategic location in central London, next to the Tower of London, on the site of the Royal Mint, becoming the People's Republic of China's largest embassy in Europe and built in close proximity to critical communication cables servicing the City of London's financial district. Are you concerned about what message this sends our international allies, particularly the United States, who are concerned about the security threats that China poses?
National security is the first duty of any government, and so we clearly take any security issues immensely seriously. Obviously, look, it's part of the diplomatic processes that countries have embassies, and we have embassies all over the world. Countries build new embassies, close old embassies, and so on. So that is not a novel process. You will understand, obviously, there is an independent planning process that is underway, and it would be wrong for me to cut across an independent planning process. But we also do have extensive consideration of security issues, and as well as the Home Office and also the Foreign Office and also the agencies also involved in the consideration of those security processes. Back in the spring, when I was Home Secretary, alongside the then Foreign Secretary, we wrote to the planning process to raise a series of security issues and to say that further work needed to be done for those to be addressed. There has been considerable work, not just with the departments, but also with the agencies as well. And also, what you may have seen is also the agreement that the number of diplomatic accredited premises that China has, if planning permission is granted, subject to that being an independent process, then those number of those diplomatic premises would be reduced from 8 to 1. Which also has significance in the process as well.
Thank you, and it's helpful to get that full answer, although I was particularly asking about the kind of message that sends some of our international allies. And on the 3rd of November, so last month, members of the House of Representatives in the USA wrote to you to express their concerns with the Super Embassy application. They said, as one of our closest allies with whom we share a special relationship, we're writing to raise concerns about the People's Republic of China's egregious attempt to construct a super embassy on the site of the Royal Mint Court, a strategic location in central London. We write to urge the denial of the proposed construction and encourage full consideration of the ramifications of allowing such a development to proceed unchecked. So I just wonder what your response is to their letter and whether, in light of their concerns, you've reviewed your position on the embassy.
So what I can say is, in terms of our discussions, both our between our agencies and the US agencies, and also between the government, in terms of the UK government and the US government, we have extensive discussions about all of these issues, including about security issues, including about embassy issues, not just in the UK, but all over the world as well. So we have a lot of close briefing, information sharing and collaboration on all of those issues. And ultimately, to be honest, it's like the most important, national security is the most important issue to us. So actually the starting point is we make sure that we are maintaining our national security, and we do so with the full advice and details from all of the security and intelligence agencies as well. And as somebody who spent 15 months as Home Secretary and has seen some of the detailed threats, challenges and issues that we face, I can assure you that I take all of those issues extremely seriously myself.
Thank you. I want to ask you about the 1,000 Mandarins speaking Mandarin that your predecessor said we were going to get, but we don't have enough time, so I'm going to ask you.
Because I'm not sure I have the answer to that in front of me, so I would definitely have to write to you on that one. But I'm sure the Permanent Under Secretary would know the answer.
Foreign Secretary, can I ask you about 3 aspects of the UK's soft power, something that we have traditionally been very strong at? The first one, which we explored with the Permanent Secretary last week, is the position of the British Council. The British Council view the existence of the loan, which was given to them during COVID, as existential, but as Sir Holly told us last week, I think rightly, there is, even if that were settled, the continuing problem that their income does not meet their expenditure. Now, there is a conflict in the British Council between the offices which are commercially successful and those which are actually of strategic importance to us in terms of UK influence abroad. Can you say whether you have reached a view yet about how the British Council can operate going forward and whether or not those challenges can be addressed?
So I should start by saying the importance of the British Council, some of the amazing work that they do across the world. And I spoke to some of the British Council employees in Kyiv, where their building had been targeted or had been hit by some of the Russian bombardment as well. So we know the importance of that sort of cultural diplomacy that also helps with both economic and security diplomacy as well. Obviously, they do face financial pressures that I think you're right to say that there's obviously the issues around the loan but also the fundamental business model. And part of the reason that they were given the loan in the first place was because of problems with the business model. So therefore, at its heart is we need to make sure that we're addressing those issues around the business model. The British Council has put forward a business plan and a turnaround plan. The stage we are at with this at the moment is that there are 2 reviews due to conclude very shortly. The first is a review of that turnaround plan and of the robustness and resilience of it and what it might achieve. And the second is into their short-term cash position. Those reviews are pending, and then obviously we need the British Council to be able to respond to the conclusions of those reviews and for us to then ensure that we've got a robust and resilient way forward. I appreciate that is a holding answer effectively, because I'm still waiting for those reviews to conclude, but very happy to ensure that we provide you with more information when we have that.
The British Council have indicated to us that 40 offices are under threat, including those in places like the Baltic states, which are of huge importance in terms of facing Russian disinformation and Russian influence. I mean, are you willing to see closures of the British Council offices of that scale?
So I need to see the reviews before we can, I think, respond to them. What's important is look, they have a hugely important role to play, but look, they, a lot of their income was based historically on the teaching of English. In some countries, that continues to be really strong. In many countries, the examinations, for example, the provision of exams for a British exam system is incredibly strong. But there are other countries where that demand has dropped, and they still have a commercial revenue of around £800 million and a further £160 million from the FCDO as well. So they still have a very substantial income each year, but we have to make sure that the costs that they have match to that, and that they have a business model that is sufficiently sustainable going forward that they are not put at risk, and the important work that they do is not put at risk. So again, unfortunately, until I can see properly what those reviews conclude, we I think need to wait until we have seen those before then responding about what the best next steps are.
Okay, well, if you could let the committee know as soon as you're in a position to. Can I turn to another aspect of soft power, which is the BBC World Service? They are countering disinformation. I think you may find it highlighted in the report that the committee is producing up against RT and Sputnik and the Chinese and any number of hostile forces who are investing far more into broadcasting than the BBC and government spend. Are you able to give an assurance that the BBC World Service language services will be maintained and that we will not see any of those closing?
So I think it reflects the strength of our commitment to the World Service and our support for the World Service that we gave a significant uplift in funding this year. I think it was 30% increase in funding to the World Service this year. And that is exactly because we hugely value the work that they do. You'll obviously understand this comes at a time when we have real significant fiscal pressures, where we also have the response to global instability. We are seeking to increase defence spending, for example, at the same time as we have the reduction in overseas development aid spending. So the fact that we've been able to do that at a time of significant financial pressures, I think shows the importance of it to us. Ultimately, the World Service is independent and has its editorial independence and takes its decisions as well about where that they have the most impact in terms of the services that they provide, but we will be continuing to support them in their important work.
Okay, I might just leave you with the thought, which I think a number of us have expressed, that the increase in defence spending, which is very welcome, should actually incorporate recognition of the importance of soft as well as hard power. So can I just move to one final area of soft power? The UK has been very strong, indeed was one of the founders of the Global Coalition for Media Freedom. It is something that we have attached huge importance to, and at the present time media freedom is probably never under greater threat than it is today. And so can you reassure us that this is still a priority of the Foreign Office and that we will be doing all we can to support independent media in the many, many countries where it is under severe threat?
Yeah, I think this is hugely important. It's a fundamental underpinning of democracy, and it's also a fundamental underpinning of the rule of law and the international rule of law that we have independent media voices. And at a time when we see not just threats to media freedom, but also threats to journalists who have shown considerable courage in some countries in the face of immense pressure and targeting as well. So we are, as you rightly say, still continuing part of the Media Freedom Coalition, and also we've also been doing some further work around the safety of journalists as well as one of the underpinning crucial parts, including discussions at the UN General Assembly just a couple of months ago on that, and we provide diplomatic support for the OSCE representative for freedom of media and their work and taking their recommendations forward. So happy to provide further information if you would like more detail, but I can assure you that both the broader issues around media freedom and also the safety of journalists as a part of that is a central issue for us.
We would appreciate further detail. Just to leave you with the thought that the USAID was of huge importance in terms of supporting media in a number of countries. That is being withdrawn. If there are ways in which the Foreign Office can look to try and increase its support to take the place of USAID, that would be hugely beneficial.
We've just come back from Bosnia, and it was very worrying what's going on there.
Yeah.
Absam.
Thank you, Chair. Foreign Secretary, last week we had the Permanent Under-Secretary talk to us about the restructure of the FCDO. So some of the questions I have are in relation to that aspect. Were you aware that the PCS union were under disputes with the FCDO?
So I think there is a dispute resolution process that the FCDO has, and the PCS have requested a dispute resolution process. And the response from the FCDO, but obviously Sir Ollie can provide more details on that, has been to propose effectively pre-dispute resolution talks and discussions before it reaches that point. So that's why I think the assessment had been that we are not formally in the dispute resolution process, although that is what the PCS have requested, but that there are further talks and discussions taking place with the HR.
Does that mean that the process is going to be paused in line with the protocol? Because I think the protocol does require that discussions would pause any further restructure until the dispute is resolved.
I'm going to hand to Sir Ollie for the details of this one.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. As I hope I explained to the committee last week, we're not currently engaged in a restructuring. Formally speaking, in the Foreign Office, I was open with you about the plans we have to continue to try and reshape the headquarters in accordance with
What's the difference between reshaping and restructuring?
No, it's not. Restructuring is the formal HR way in which you achieve a reshaping. There's no difference. Reshaping is English and restructuring is HR. So we're not currently restructuring anybody. And what I tried to explain to the committee last week is that we will be.
Have received an at-risk notice, so presumably there has been some discussions in relation to restructuring. Otherwise, staff members would not have received those letters.
Yes, Ms Mohammed, I tried to explain to the committee previously, we have undertaken 2 restructurings so far in 2025 at the 2 most senior tiers of the organisation at headquarters, but we are not currently engaged in a restructuring process.
Okay. It sounds to me like there is some sort of restructure taking place there. I'm not sure if it's just semantics here. Is there a strategic overview in terms of deciding where staff are going to go? I'm not sure if this is for the Foreign Secretary. Are you looking at things on the whole rather than deciding bit by bit that certain staff members will lose their jobs without doing a full review?
So the starting point from this is that over the last 10 years, there had been a very substantial increase in the workforce compared to the combined workforce of the 2 departments, the Foreign Office and DFID, 10 years ago. And with the combined department now, the staffing increase, I think, is something like 25% increase in overall staff, and within which that is a 40% increase in staff in the UK. So that obviously is a very big change in the course of 10 years to have such a focus on UK staff. Alongside that, we have, I think, to recognise the very significant changing world around us and the way in which the Foreign Office needs to respond with agility and be able to pick up more thematic changes, be able to deal with not just area by area of the world, but also look more thematically at some of the things that the government needs to be able to achieve abroad. So the fact that we now have some of the things that David had established was sort of a thematic approach around security, around economic prosperity, around migration, which is an area that I have also expanded, around climate, around development, and around effectively not just Europe but international structures as well. And that we needed to be able to move and have a restructuring that reflected those priorities. So yes, there is a sense of what the overall priorities should be as part of this discussion, but in terms of then the detailed staffing decisions, those have to be taken through the civil service about how best to make sure that those staffing decisions are then made and how that can be done in the most positive way to ensure that we also have the scale of training, the diplomatic training and skills that we have for the future as well.
And what kind of timescales are you looking at to complete?
If I may, Foreign Secretary, we need to make sure that we have got a structure in place for the beginning of the new financial year. That doesn't mean, of course, that all the consequences of that structure will have been worked through by that point. But given our hearing on the annual report last week, we're trying to make sure that the overall allocations, budgets and workforce plans are in place for the beginning of the new financial year.
So what will happen? So by April, presumably you'll have made the decisions about the numbers of staff, jobs, potentially that may have to go.
Yes.
At that point. Okay, do you not think that that's too soon?
Can I just ask us about this reshaping? What you've told us so far is that there's a top layer which is being shrunk, and then that top layer is being asked to put forward plans for reducing their staff below them between 15 and 25%. And that does seem to me to look more like cutting a bit of salami than it is about looking at how the FCDO's reshaping reflects the priorities of the Foreign Secretary.
Well, what we're trying to do is make sure that, if we end up recommending back to the Foreign Secretary a completely blanket staff cut across every directorate, I think we will have failed. As the Foreign Secretary was saying, we're trying to take account of the thematic priorities she and the government have set the department, think about where the world has changed around us, and what I suspect we will end up with is some quite differentiated results across those different parts of the headquarters function.
Okay. And there are three areas, for example, that I've sort of been increasing the focus, just as a for example, which is increasing the staffing around migration, because we need to do much more around the prevention work, around returns, around upstream, and also around being able to expand some of the principles that underpinned the agreement with France. We will only actually be able to tackle some of those issues if we work with other countries. Also around Sudan, we've been increasing the number of people working on Sudan because that is incredibly important. And I'm also increasing the emphasis around some of the violence against women and girls and some of the work on women and girls more widely. Of course, so this involves actually being able to try and respond to our priorities and be able to reflect that and to move staff appropriately to be able to do that.
Okay. It feels like an incredibly rushed process to do all of this in 4 months. What steps will you take to ensure that you involve the union within this very tight timescale?
May I answer that, Foreign Secretary? We are meeting with the departmental trade unions extremely frequently and regularly. So my HR team met with the trade union side twice last week, an hour each time. We are trying to bring them with us as far as we possibly can and genuinely value the engagement and ideas that they're bringing to those discussions. So the commitment, as I made to you last week and I want to make in front of the Foreign Secretary, is that we will engage strongly and continue to engage strongly with the trade union side, listen to their concerns. We have absolutely no desire for our colleagues to feel anything other than supported and properly dealt with through this process.
Thank you. Foreign Secretary, last week we also discussed the fact that the FCDO has the highest rate of bullying, discrimination and harassment, almost double the civil service average. Why is there such a toxic culture at the FCDO?
So I am concerned about that survey. Clearly it is something that that needs to be addressed. Maybe again if I could turn to Sir Ollie in terms of responding.
Yeah. Well, it's as I said to the committee, I mean, any rate above zero is not something that we're ever going to be happy with. You're right. The level reported in our people survey scores has been high relative to other civil service organisations. It still is in the results that have just been given to us, though down on the previous year. And so the most important thing I think we can do, and we're doing at pace now, is to try and, because we get information at quite a granular level about teams at headquarters, about posts overseas, is work out those areas where we seem to be improving and improving fast and make sure we're learning the lessons from that and promulgating them across the organisation. Plus, of course, taking a very close interest in those areas where bullying, harassment scores appear to be stubborn, and making sure that we're discussing why that might be with the either heads of mission or senior officers at home who are responsible for those parts of the department.
And that follows on from the comments of Nick last week, where he said we're a little bit stuck on the issue of bullying. Foreign Secretary, is that really an acceptable position?
No, clearly it's not, and we need to make sure that progress is made. I think it's having served in very many different government departments, and I'm not going to even count how many now in different times through the years. There is, I find the Foreign Office is distinctive because it has so many people overseas and so many different, therefore, parallel structures in terms of HR management overseas. So I think, but we need to make sure that that doesn't become a sort of an obstacle for tackling things that might be much simpler in a single department that has got a sort of single set of structures and therefore can do change programs much more swiftly in a single coordinated way. The fact that we have such a disaggregated footprint all over the world as part of the very purpose can't be a reason why we can't address issues that come through on surveys like that.
Thank you. Thank you, Jo.
Can we go on to British Overseas Territories, Phil?
Yes, the UK government is preparing to host a major international summit next year on countering illicit finance. Foreign Secretary, what do you hope to achieve through the summit?
Thank you. Yes, well, as you can see, we've set out a new strategy on tackling illicit finance, which is a cross-government strategy as well, and I think highlights the issues that we have been raising, that certainly that my predecessor, that David Lammy had been raising as well, about tackling issues around illicit finance. One of the key things as part of that has to be the work done in terms of the overseas territories, but actually that is only a part of it, because there's also the further work that we can do using our expertise, whether that be around issues around sanctions, whether that be things around the Treasury, whether that be around just having stronger overseas and international and domestic leadership on tackling some of the criminal aspects and going after the money. So just as a for example, the work the Home Office has been doing with Italy on illicit finance that underpins organised immigration crime. So there are different aspects to this, and the whole point about doing the strategy was to bring all of this together. The point about being able to host the summit was to be able to show this is what, actually, if we have all of these different countries and agencies and organisations working together in a comprehensive way, that sharing of information, sharing of intelligence, that is how we will literally follow the money, go after the money, and be able to tackle the criminals who are at the heart of it.
Now, you've spoken quite a lot in today's session before the committee about sanctions. What moral authority will the UK government have to convene an international countering illicit finances summit if our own overseas territories fail to tackle the offshore financial secrecy which allows the likes of Putin's cronies to clean and stash their corrupt proceeds offshore?
So I'd say two things. First of all, we do expect greater progress from the overseas territories. We are insisting on it, and I raised it in the Joint Ministerial Council with them recently. Some of them have made substantial progress, others have been slower, and our anti-corruption champion, Baroness Hodge, has been visiting some of those in order to hasten progress as well. I would though just say, I think in terms of the application of sanctions, some of the overseas territories have done some excellent work in terms of the application of sanctions, and that has had a significant impact, especially on some of the sort of Russian shadow fleet issues, given the maritime focus of some of those countries as well.
Thank you.
One more question. You're right, good, because we're running out of time. Thank you. Gibraltar, do you want to ask some questions?
Thank you. Foreign Secretary, has the government received a copy of the McGrail inquiry report?
I understand that we do have information on it. I have not yet seen the details of it.
Do you know if it was the full report or a redacted version of it?
I don't know the answer to that.
We are looking forward to publication of the inquiry's report, but we see this primarily as a matter for the government for Gibraltar.
We see it as a matter for us to oversee, and we would like to see it too, please. And if you aren't able to give us full details, we will want to know.
Yeah. I wonder if the government has any view on the potential for the First Minister using the powers that he passed last year to only provide a redacted version of that report to the public.
So I understand the point the committee is making here. This is something that Stephen Doughty has been dealing with in the department, and I understand the concerns for transparency that you are raising. My expectation would be that there will be a publication, but I will pursue this issue and get back to you.
In terms of the EU-UK
Yes.
Gibraltar Treaty, when can this committee expect to see the text of that?
We hope to be able to do so as swiftly as possible. The political agreement obviously was reached, but we have not, I think, well, not yet ready to be able to publish the full treaty. That will be published and will go before the House in due course. There'll be plenty of opportunities to scrutinise the treaty.
As in, the government will commit to allowing time in the chamber to debate the treaty?
There will be the normal processes around treaties, which does include scrutiny in the chamber and will include discussions. And I also, obviously, it will be your prerogative to be able to ask questions and to scrutinise the committee from the point of view of the subcommittee as well.
The normal process at the moment is that we have weekly urgent questions on Chagos in order to be able to do so, because proper time hasn't been allowed to scrutinise the treaty. So I'm wondering whether or not the government wants to commit to allowing time to scrutinise the EU-UK Gibraltar Treaty.
I think, to be fair, there's a whole piece of legislation going through around BIOT, which has lots of opportunities for lots of discussions in both houses of Parliament, and there have been such. There have been very many long debates, both in the Commons and in the Lords, about some of the issues, including around Chagos, including around BIOT, and so on. So those have been extensive discussions.
Finally, just in terms of the inquiry, the McGrail inquiry, do you foresee any situation in which the report itself will delay the completion of the negotiations over the UK-EU treaty?
I would not expect that, and certainly wouldn't want to see that at all. This is been an ongoing negotiation on the details, where a political agreement has already been reached and signed up to by the government of Gibraltar, by UK and Spanish governments, and it's really important that that is taken forward as rapidly as possible.
Uma.
Thank you, Chair. Foreign Secretary, you'll be aware of the devastating flooding in Sri Lanka as a result of the cyclone. It's one of the worst humanitarian and natural disasters there. Can I thank the government for the support that we've given and working with humanitarian partners? Can I get your commitment that you'll continue to look again at what more we can do? And I've written to the department to ask us to encourage the Sri Lankan government to make sure that communications go not just in English and Sinhalese, but also in Tamil.
Well, actually, thank you for raising that point. This is just the most devastating of cyclones, and I would send condolences to all of those who have lost loved ones, but also the damage people have seen to their homes, to communities as well. We provided 675,000 of humanitarian support through the Red Cross and UN partners, as well as other civil society organisations, in order to be able to deliver some of that life-saving care and emergency supplies. We're also continue to be in close contact with the Sri Lankan authorities on this, and I will also ensure that Seema Malhotra, the Minister who covers this, will also pursue the issue around the language access as well for information.
Thank you. Turning to another matter in Sri Lanka, Foreign Secretary, when your predecessor appeared before the committee in November 24 and again in July 25, I asked him about justice for the Tamil community. An investigation by the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN found that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Sri Lankan forces committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, including torture, sexual violence, and forced disappearances. The list goes on. This is against the civilian population. It's been 15 years since the war's end, and there's not been a special court or any criminal investigations into those war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide. The victims, their families, the survivors, no one's been listened to. Given that the Sri Lankan state has failed to prosecute the perpetrators of war crimes, they won't ratify the Rome Statute of the ICC, and there's a lack of political will. Will the UK continue to push the Sri Lankan government to make sure that there is justice and accountability for Tamils?
Yeah. So obviously, as you say, this is a deep, long-standing and troubling issue. We do continue to encourage the Sri Lankan government to recognise the legitimate concerns around the need for truth and reconciliation here, and to properly recognise and address some of those long-standing serious problems and grievances as well. So we will continue to raise this. We have also pressed the Sri Lankan government to take transformation action and sustained action in terms of improving human rights, and I think, as you'll probably know, that we had sanctions, I think, 4 individuals back in March, I think, of this year as well on those grounds. So we see this as an issue moving forward as well.
I welcome that, and if you're looking at further sanctions as a package, please do consider some of the other individuals that have been put forward too.
There's one last question, and that's this. Your predecessor agreed that Lord Mandelson, as a political appointment to the role of UK ambassador to the US, would appear before the committee to face questions on the suitability of the role. And in the 7 months that he was in post, although we did ask many times, that session never took place. So will you commit to the committee that we will be given the opportunity to question politically appointed ambassadors from now on?
So I think you would probably understand is for us to do hearings and so on while there is a political process or while there is an appointment process underway would, I think, obviously be very difficult. Yeah, but we do want ambassadors, including political appointment ambassadors, to be able to give evidence to the committee where it is appropriate to do so. So I can say that yes, we will facilitate that.
Not quite the question. You see, there's a difference between an ambassador who's appointed, who's employed by the Foreign Office, and someone who the government decides, as a matter of politics, should take the place of an ambassador, should go as an ambassador. Now, I know that there's an argument that even though they're a political appointment, they're not there in their own right. It's not like an Ofsted person who can go off and do their own thing. But it does beg the question, why have a political appointment for an ambassador if they're not going to be using a bit of discretion? And it's for that very reason that we think we're not asking to be involved in the decision making, but before they take up the post, or even if not before they take up the post, in the early few weeks, we do think that it's appropriate for them to appear in front of us.
So I think the anything which is about probably taking evidence of them before they take up post when there is somebody else in post, for example, I think that is quite challenging in terms of the roles that we need people to play. And also the ambassadors do need to be the representatives of the whole British government, and they are not, ultimately I and other ministers are accountable to you and accountable to Parliament for the decisions that we take and for the way that we operate, as opposed to individuals who, whatever the process for them to be appointed, ultimately they're once appointed, they play the role as the voice of the British government as a whole abroad. I do think, though, that you should be able to also ask questions of those who do these jobs abroad, just as you would, and any other committee would ask questions of civil servants. I recognise the point that you are making about the added issues around political appointments, so I do recognise that and would take that into account, but I would see this as the Foreign Office hopefully facilitating you being able to ask questions of ambassadors and high commissioners in different roles around the world.
We do think that there's a precedent, and we believe that we're losing it. So Ed Llewellyn came in front of the committee, Baroness Scotland came in front of the committee, and Lord Mandelson didn't. And we think that we don't want to lose this, because we think it's an important part that we play within this process. And if there's so little difference, as I said before, between a Foreign Office ambassador and a politically appointed ambassador, then why bother with a political appointment? And if you're going to bother with a political appointment, they should appear in front of the politicians.
I think the way in which the committee was able to question Ed Llewellyn, I think, is a good thing. So I am recognising the point that you are making, whilst also saying that I think this should be something the way you can take evidence from ambassadors more widely.
Forgive me, Foreign Secretary. I think I wrote you on this point, Chair. That I think Ed Llewellyn gave evidence to the committee after he took up his appointment in Paris.
Yeah. No, and we're not, and we're absolutely. I hope that I've been. If I've not been clear, it's my fault. But I don't want to be involved. We don't want to be involved in the decision. We don't want to be, we quite understand it could be embarrassing for an ambassador who's still doing a job for another for the next person to be in front of the committee, possibly saying slightly different things. What with them being a political appointment and all. So we don't want that to happen. So we do appreciate it, but nevertheless, they should appear in front of us, and we think that we would add extra value if that's what happened. Anyway. Sorry about that. That was the end of it. And we would like to thank you for appearing before us today. And you've agreed to write to us on several points, and we look forward to those. And we look forward to seeing you regularly in as part of our job, scrutinising the Foreign Office. And wishing you a happy Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and happy Christmas.